Right, so where the world hopes that a ceasefire in Gaza becomes a reality now, despite signs being that it is unfortunately a scam, and atrocity will end up resuming in due course, aggression elsewhere in the Middle East at the behest of Western interests isn't letting up at all, despite shifts in relation to said Gaza ceasefire, seemingly dictating the actions or inactions of those who have been fighting in solidarity with the Palestinians. And public enemy number one at this point in time remains Ansar Allah, the Houthis in Yemen, and a series of engagements that appears to be less and less now about Gaza and Israel, and more the beef the US has with Ansar Allah, and how much they have repeatedly embarrassed the Biden administration, not intimidated by their assets in the Red Sea, in point of fact the aircraft carrier the Harry S Truman becoming a favourite and repeated target of the Houthis. But with this ceasefire due to officially begin on Sunday, there's been a shift in the Houthis' stance. So why not the US too? Or is Biden determined to live up to his moniker of Genocide Joe right up to his very last day in office? Right, so whilst the news of a ceasefire nearing conclusion, passing, and now officially due to be enacted come Sunday, despite Israel still very much attacking Gaza, other news has slipped down the agenda in the Middle East, and the fact that the US and the Houthis have been taking whacking great chunks out of each other all week long has passed many of us by, and does form part of the Gaza ceasefire story too, of course, the Houthis having been some of the most vociferous and determined supporters of the Gazan people, giving many an Israeli a sleepless night as they flee to the shelters on a nightly basis, with rocket and drone attacks very much setting those sirens off, even as far north as Haifa, almost all the way towards Lebanon, the range the Houthis now have, and have actually developed these past 15 months, being truly astonishing. So we need to have a bit of a catch-up, and as much as the attacks on Israel feature heavily, it is their actions versus the US that have been more prominent in the last week. It's been no secret that the Houthis have been particularly focused on attacks on the US aircraft carrier, the USS Harry S Truman, the flagship of the US Maritime Strike Force in the Red Sea, and as we know, the Houthis have been a dab hand at interfering in Red Sea shipping when it comes to goods and support, both commercial and military, for Israel and any of their allies. The Truman is accompanied by guided missile destroyer the USS Jason Dunham and the missile cruiser the USS Gettysburg. Well, come last Saturday, the Houthis launched what became a 9-hour-long prolonged assault on these ships. Combined attacks of missiles and drones has become their customary tactic now, difficult to engage both styles of assault at the same time, as it's turned out to be. Houthi spokesperson Yahya Saree said in his customary post-attack address that triumphing for the oppression of the Palestinian people and their mujahideen, and in response to the massacres against our people in Gaza, and following the Israeli, American and British aggression against our country, the missile and drone forces of the Yemeni armed forces, with the help of Allah Almighty, carried out a joint military operation during the past 24 hours, targeting the American aircraft carrier USS Harry S Truman and a number of its warships in the northern Red Sea region, with a number of cruise missiles and drones. And the engagement with the carrier and its related units lasted 9 hours, and this targeting of the carrier is the 5th since its arrival in the Red Sea. The operation achieved its goals successfully thanks to Allah, and forced the aircraft carrier to leave the theatre of operations and flee to the far north of the Red Sea. The Yemeni armed forces confirmed their high readiness to confront any American or Israeli escalation against our country, relying on Allah and trusting in Allah. The Yemeni armed forces reiterate that they will continue to carry out their duties towards the oppressed Palestinian people, and that their operations will not stop until the aggression stops and the siege on the Gaza Strip is lifted. All of these attacks were cited to have been in response to recent US airstrikes on the capital Sana'a. But as always, and indeed in the way we've seen matters continue between Western US-led forces and the Houthis, the tit-for-tat exchanges we've seen so many of now, but that have increased in recent weeks, this was met with a response. A 9-hour naval battle, as this was, has been a major escalation again between the two sides, and it was met with major explosions in Yemen within hours of the Houthis' attack on US military shipping. Where the Houthis as ever went after military targets, the US, on January 12th, as we are at this point, decided to attack some gas stations, though. 4 of them in Al-Baida, apparently, which killed 15 and injured a further 40, and I will bet my bottom dollar not one of them was a Houthi, as once again Western attacks are focused on civilian targets. No intelligence on where the Houthis actually are in their possession, and not for want of trying, as this channel has covered previously, and yet still they have to attack something. Face-saving exercise. Destroy something, as if that will actually stop the Houthis. They just don't think that way, even if you had found an accurate target. Within hours, the Houthis launched an attack on Israel this time, though, through the day into the evening of the 13th of January and overnight into the 14th. It began with drone attacks on Israel during the day, one apparently being brought down by an Israeli helicopter, followed by a missile attack after dark, triggering those air sirens once again as they do nightly, even as Israel claimed to have shot the missile down. But then they weren't sure. Another report came out showing the IDF were actually less than forthcoming, or honestly forthcoming, about having brought down said missile, despite several attempts to have done so, once more begging questions about the state of Israel's air defences now. And with some 11 people apparently having been injured, according to the Magen David Adom ambulance service, there was some conjecture going around as to whether the missile had actually hit, or fragments had just caused injury to these people. And yet, according to the particularly pro-Netanyahu Times of Israel, none of these were actually caused by a missile strike or falling fragments. It wasn't initially clear how these 11 people were hurt at all, but as it turns out, they were actually hurt in accidents running for the shelters. Perhaps getting out of Gaza would help these people, therefore. The missile Israel tried to shoot down ended up falling on some houses in occupied Jerusalem. In bits, it had to be said, but big enough chunks to flatten several roofs, and including one particularly large cylinder of wreckage sitting pretty on the roofline of one property in particular. In response to this, the Houthis took great joy in, well, basically taking the piss out of Israel's air defences, or frankly lack of them at this point. And then came another assault on the Harry S Truman on the 15th, on the day the Israel Gaza ceasefire was agreed. More cruise missiles, more drones. The claim, as per the Houthi spokesperson as ever, is that they achieved their goals successfully. But now what for the Houthis in light of the ceasefire being signed? And as I'm writing this, the news come out that the Israeli Security Cabinet has now approved the ceasefire, for whatever that is worth. Well, news came in the day after the ceasefire was agreed to that the Houthis will now suspend, watch that word, suspend all attacks on Israel as a result of the ceasefire agreement, depending on whether or not Israel sticks to it. And if attacks continue up until Sunday when the ceasefire officially comes into effect, then the Houthis will continue to retaliate. And that smacks of Israel not being able to get away with doing in Gaza what they've done in Lebanon during that particular ceasefire, which is to completely ignore it and continue attacking Lebanon on a daily basis, because the Houthis would then take up arms against Israel in retaliation once again, it seems. There's a fine line to tread here, because the Houthis would have to be very careful to ensure they are not ending up being accused in the global media of being the reason any ceasefire fails. We know it's a scam already, thanks to the likes of Israeli outlet Ynet exposing the dirty deal being done behind the scenes between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu concerning this ceasefire. So the last thing the Houthis, I'm sure, would want would be to provide them with a scapegoat. Nevertheless, much mockery has come from the Houthis as well. The fact Israel failed in its aims has come directly from Houthi leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi himself in a televised address he gave yesterday, saying Israel had failed miserably to achieve their goals, something many Israelis, frankly, would agree with right now, because not only have Hamas already started recovering, and very quickly at that, but the hostages, of course, remain in Gaza, though still alive and not having been killed by indiscriminate Israeli strikes, therefore still forcing a hostage exchange at the end of the day. The Houthis are ready to down tools, though, but conditionally, upon Israel acting in good faith. This has meant that despite agreeing to end attacks on shipping as part of that, shipping companies, it has to be said, are being rather cagey about it, speaking volumes about how much faith they actually have in Israel being an honest broker themselves. For example, shipping news outlet Safety for Sea have nailed that on in an article they posted today titled, "Houthis to continue attacks if Israel won't adhere to ceasefire," which says it all. And after the Lebanon ceasefire, the world has seen what Israel's word on ceasefires has been worth in recent times. The questioning in the air, as much as whether or not attacks on Israel by the Houthis will end up continuing if Israel's word proves as worthless as we all expect it to be, is whether the Houthis themselves will be left alone too. War ending in Gaza doesn't mean it's all forgive and forget for other nations who involved themselves here. No other group, aside from the Houthis, has done as much to shame and embarrass not just Israel, but the US. And the question hangs in the air as to whether or not the US will now just walk away from them themselves. It would be a more salient issue to dig into if we could really believe the ceasefire was for real. But with Bezalel Smotrich pledging to bring Netanyahu's government down if the ceasefire doesn't end at phase 1 of the 3-phase deal, and with the deal itself a Trump-Netanyahu scam on the face of it anyway, I think it is largely a moot point. If the ceasefire was legit, I'd be surmising, given the Houthis have meted out as to whether Trump would double down on trying to save face here. But equally, I think the failure of the US when it comes to the Houthis can easily be left by him as Biden's failure. And if not, then the US and Israeli failures where it comes to the Houthis would only continue. Will US ships withdraw from the Red Sea now this ceasefire is in place? That would tell us a lot, wouldn't it? Nothing has functionally changed that I see here, though. Israel's allies lack the military intelligence and lack any discernible ability to hinder the Houthis in any meaningful way. Giving up fighting them has, as history has shown numerous times, generally been how conflicts involving them have ended. It would probably be how this one would end if this ceasefire could be believed. But it's too hard to believe that with Israel as the most dishonest and depraved negotiator going as they are. Continuing to attack the Houthis will be a complete waste of time. And for more examples as to why this is the case for anyone who might disagree, or for anyone interested in following this story more deeply, check out this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't already done so in order to support the channel, which is very much appreciated. And also make sure you don't miss out on new content dropping daily, and I will hopefully catch you on the next video. Cheers folks.